Thank you for taking the time to participate on this live broadcast of the Coatings Talk Leadership Series. Next up is David Hunter, PCS and MCI, on the topic of leadership is about industry learning. Welcome to another installment of the Coatings Talk Leadership Series. Throughout this series, we've been talking about leadership in the global protective coatings and corrosion industries. But the conversations we've been having and the guests I've been having, these topics, these conversations, they can apply across any different industry. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in, leadership is critical, leadership is crucial, and you also want to make sure that if you want to become a leader, that you follow the appropriate steps and take the advice of people who have been there, done it, and are leading that life. Joining me today is David Hunter, who's a certified protective coatings specialist and also a master coating inspector. He's a global instructor, and he's certified thousands of people globally in various professional certifications. David, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you giving me the time.
Hey, David, for those watching this stream, if you could do me a favor, if you could provide your professional background and importantly, talk about your leadership journey and then also, too, some of the credentials you have in the education and training you've done globally.
Okay. So right now, my official job title, I work for Hempel Coatings, Hempel Paints, which is about $1 billion coating manufacturer headquartered in Denmark. And what I do is I handle a segment of our products called corrosion under insulation coatings, high heat and insulation coatings. And I help the sales team understand how those work and where to use them and train the sales team globally on where they work and interface with a lot of engineering personnel from our customers to explain to them how these products can help them have a better reality in their operating units. My background is I'm a civil engineer. I went to Virginia Tech. I've been in the coatings industry 28 years. I got my NACE, my AMP CIP level 3 back in 1996 and have been dealing in the coatings industry pretty much my whole career. The interesting thing about, no one wakes up when they're 5 years old and says, I want to be in the coatings industry. It kind of finds you, and once it gets a hold, it doesn't leave. And the thing about engineering, engineers oftentimes are charged with having to maintain structures. And the problem is that in engineering degree programs, they don't teach about coatings. And so, one of my first projects, I had to climb 150 feet in the air on a water tank. And the tank wasn't falling down, the paint was falling off. And my boss said, hey, I need you to write a specification on how to fix that. And I said, I don't know anything about coatings. And so what I said is I better learn. And as I gravitated and found the industry associations, both at the time, NACE and SSPC, they had these training programs that really filled the gap in my knowledge that the degree programs didn't have. And so as I took those courses and became more involved, I found that the problems were always different and challenging, but they were more interesting to me. The corrosion problems were more interesting to me than designing a new bridge or a new structure. And so throughout my career, I've gotten to run around the world. I'm up to, 38 countries and 48 states. And I've got to see how everyone builds everything from super tankers to refineries, to breweries, to amusement parks, food and beverage, stadiums, everything has a coating on it. And so the problems and how to solve those problems really require some specific attention in the industry. I've been a NACE and SSPC instructor now for 16 years, and I was really honored at the last AMPP show to win a teaching award. I probably have a couple of thousand students at this point, and some students were nice enough to nominate me to win the award, and I was selected. But I've been teaching between NACE and SSPC about 9 different courses for the industry, including the CIP level 1 and 2. I actually teach the NACE nuclear course, offshore corrosion assessment. I teach the fireproofing course, and I actually teach the concrete coatings inspector course, as well as some of the general corrosion programs. One of the courses I teach quite a bit now is the corrosion under insulation course, which of course is kind of reinforcing to my job at Hempel.
Well, David, I'm sorry, I interrupted you there. Go ahead.
So, I think the key thing in how you become a leader in your industry is the credibility and the knowledge is the very first step. You've got to have that. And that's what inspires confidence to your customers and your colleagues, as to be able to solve those problems. And the education part is really critical to being able to do that.
Very good. David, you and I have known each other since 2013. I've encountered many of your students when I travel internationally, and I can say firsthand, not only did you deserve that award at the 2023 AMP conference, but also too, you actually have been cultivating the younger generation to become those next leaders, not only in the corrosion industry, but also too in the global protective coatings industry as well. So you've really been out there as a trailblazer, both as an educator, also as an industry leader. So you definitely well deserve that reward, and probably a lot of other rewards as well.
Well, I appreciate that. It's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. I think it comes through in my presentations to my students. Sometimes corrosion and coatings it can be a little bit dull, right? And so I think the important thing is what makes the difference is the enthusiasm, the passion, and realizing that that carries the message, right? Anyone can present the same message, but what's behind the message and the enthusiasm can make all the difference in whether it's well received or not.
Yeah, I think the thing that we want to kick this off is talk about the importance of learning. As a young professional, and even a seasoned professional, if you're really looking to get into leadership, it's very crucial that your industry growth and development, especially if your career goal is to become an industry leader, that learning is such an important aspect of it. Why is learning so critical for an industry leader?
Well, it's funny, everybody thinks that the coatings industry is stodgy and there's not a whole lot new, but that's not really true. Every industry is always innovating one way or another, whether it's leaps and bounds or incremental. And you always have to stay ahead of those, being able to offer those solutions to the customers and understanding why one solution may be better than another. That's what engineers do, right? We try to provide the best solution, the most economic best solution for our customers. So you always have to be abreast of what's being developed, what new techniques are available. And so, when I had an opportunity at the AMP conference to talk in the Emerge program, and one thing I said to the students there was, never, ever, ever turn down an opportunity to learn, regardless of what it is, because you never know how it's going to lead into the position that you're going to work towards. So take every opportunity you can to learn something new. It also keeps you fully engaged.
It really does. And another thing too that learning does is it really kind of, when you're going through, learning, training, certification, whatever you're looking to do as a professional, growing as a professional and getting into leadership, is that it tends to open your mind, expand your horizon. But the most important thing, I think, a lot of times what I've noticed with training and certification and learning is that it really benefits a company as much as the professional who's going down that development path. But also when it comes to culture, it tends to seem to really kind of help business culture. How have you seen from your students improvements that they've taken to their companies and some of the things related to culture or business improvement?
It's funny. I've had people even inside my own organization who haven't kind of grown up through the coatings industry. And so we'd have discussions and meetings, and I'd be describing something to them, like measuring surface profile. And if you've never taken a course in what that is and why it's important, I'm trying to describe to them, how that affects total dry film thickness, and my team didn't understand. And I think what builds the credibility, and I've heard this even from competitors, I got a new boss and he came from outside the industry, and that person can perform well on that job, but the credibility of the people working, the credibility of that person for the people that are working underneath them is having that technical knowledge. And that's, I think, unbelievably important. It builds that. I've got someone who's got my back who really understands what we're talking about. And that, I don't care what level you are in the industry, if you're a vice president and you come in from outside the industry, take some of these courses to understand the business, because the questions that you ask will be so much better, and the credibility of the people working underneath you will be highly elevated.
So true, so true. So the Association for Talent Development had done a study of professionals, and they found that 50% of those who identify themselves as either in leadership development or a leader, that they fear missing out on crucial training and learning opportunities for their position, for their industry. What recommendations do you have for people who, are on that leadership journey or already as a leader, of how they can stay in tune of what's available out there, especially if you're looking at, let's say, our protective coatings industry?
Well, there's really two industry associations. There was, right, SSPC and NACE, and now they've merged to AMP, which I'm very positive on, for no other reason than the corrosion industry isn't huge, so unifying that was, I think, desperately important. But if you're in the leadership in this industry, what I think the most important thing to do is check your ego at the door, right? I know you're the vice president of whatever, but you know what? Go take a CIP1 course, because all of your frontline salespeople typically have that, and that lets them know that right? You're going to ask better questions. If you have a problem on a job site, you can understand what the issues might be and be able to solve it quicker, not only for your customers, but be able to explain it to further up the management chain. So I think I've seen a number of people in higher level positions in the industry that refuse to take the training, or they're afraid to take the training because they're afraid they may not do well, and they don't want to look bad in front of their colleagues or subordinates. And so they turn down those opportunities. And I just can say, without a shadow of a doubt, take every chance you can, regardless of your level in the business. And AMP has so many courses, right, that can really fill a lot of knowledge gaps. It made all the difference in my career of being successful, is having the technical knowledge and then being able to explain it to our customers.
Yeah, and I think also too, globally, if you look at the different organizations out there that have their certification schemes that are out there, you have a lot of different opportunities in Europe, in the Asia Pacific area, uh, also Latin America, South, and then also in Africa as well. So you have a lot of different organizations, including obviously AMP being global as well. So there's a lot that it's out there. Now, back to that, that talent survey that was done. 64% of respondents said that it was important for them to learn something new, because what it did for them when they were taking the training, the certification, whatever they were taking in their leadership journey and development, it helped them connect to new people, either internally or externally. So in looking at your global outreach, when you as the instructor doing multiple training and certification sessions out there, how, first off, how does that help your network of connections, but also how does that help your students when it comes to networking professionally?
For me, it's been invaluable, right? This industry, I know that many customers are I think the industry is going towards more online purchasing and online interactions, but I can tell you that I still believe in my heart of hearts that face-to-face, a lot of times we are, what we're building or what we're selling is not necessarily a material. What we're selling is the confidence that we know it'll work in the application that we need it to work in, right? Anyone can have a solution, but does it really work? And have you done it before? And those are pretty critical. And so my opportunity, one thing that not only, one of the reasons I teach is not because I have this ego that I need to teach. It's I get to learn too, right? My students bring me problems that they've run into that I've never heard about, or they'll tell me about a situation and how they solved it. And so still to this day, I have students reach out to me and ask me for advice on certain situations, and I get to hear about the problems that they're running into. So it comes down to being able to develop new products that solve those problems, or just maybe it's the surface preparation method. So for me, it's been an awesome two-way street. It's built my network around the world. And the nice thing is one thing that I think is really important is not just the training portion, I've tried really hard to share my knowledge through the industry publications. So I've been published 20 plus times, and so people know who I am. So when I show up, there's this great exchange, and the industry is super great about networking and giving people opportunities like that, and that's allowed me to grow in both directions, not only in my ability to teach, but also the ability for me to learn.
Yeah, that's such an important thing. And the one thing I've never shared with you, you were one of the catalyst for me to really want to pursue protective coatings specialist certification. Reading what you were publishing out there, also the presentations that you would do consistently at both the SSPC conferences, the NACE conferences, the AMP conference, and then also encountering you when we would travel in some circles in Latin America, and all the time I'd be running into students. And so, you were an inspiration for me to really want to get my protective coating specialist. But let's go and talk a little bit about some of our industry, leadership lessons when it comes to the learning and the training and the certification. And let me open up by talking about, after I obtained my protective coating specialist, prior to that, the only certificate really that's the only certification in the protective coatings industry I can really obtain, because I'm not an active inspector. But I did do a level 1 protective coatings inspector and a level 1 concrete coatings inspector. And I've done a lot of various quality control and a lot of different other trainings through both SSPC and NACE. And it's really benefited me in the area of what I'm doing currently right now. Both it's helped me in my current career, what I'm doing right now, but also too, right here, what we're doing, we're talking about leadership. We're talking about the importance of leadership in the protective coatings, in the corrosion industries. But as a content creator, it really kind of expanded my horizons, opened my eyes to say, there is so much information, and we have customers, we have prospects, we have colleagues, we have the whole world that a lot of times they don't fully understand or comprehend the importance of corrosion and protective coatings when it comes to everyday life. And so part of my goal is to create content to help educate, inform, enlighten people, but also too, I want to help, like you are, cultivate that younger generation to want to become, as you mentioned earlier, most of us don't grow up and say, I'm going to be a corrosion person, I'm going to be a coatings person. It's like probably somebody comes to you and says, David, you're now the subject matter expert on coatings because you knew more about coatings than anybody else in your firm, right?
Pretty much how it happened. And the interesting thing is, I didn't know my job existed, right? Where I started out, I got my engineering degree and I got out and I was building stuff and I was doing calculations all day. And I realized that probably wasn't my best future for me. But as I started getting into the coatings business, what I really excel at, there's a job out there for that. And so one of the things I try to tell the younger generation is, listen, there's a job that fits your personality type to a T, and you just may not know about it. And the coatings industry is a fantastic way. If when I tell people what I do and how I do it, many times I get the, I want your job. And I said, Come and get it. We need folks, right? It's hard. We're all competing for talent. And, the coatings industry has a rub that it's not as cool as maybe other high-tech industries. But everything you look at, everything around you has some sort of coating on it. And if you combine the top 10 paint companies, it has the sales volume or GDP of countries. And so that's how big the industry is. And so there's really unlimited opportunity for someone to come in and do well. And so that's been really exciting for me. And I try to relay that to the students. If you believe it's out there, it is. And the coatings industry provides you a lot of different avenues to be able to insert your talents.
Yeah, I'll even add to what you're talking about, David. Think about those international students you've had that have gone through level 2, level 3. They're now out there. They're earning family-sustaining wages because of what you. And again, I'm not, like you said, you're not doing it for praise or glory or anything like that. You're giving back to the industry. But think of the impact that you've done by helping them further themselves in their career and when it comes to especially earning a family sustaining wage. So that's an amazing thing to give back to the industry as well.
There's again, when you look at the industries, there's lots of engineers, but there's not a lot of engineers who know what we do, right, or do what we do. And so the demand is high, the compensation is commensurate with that. And so being able to learn about this industry and provide that type of service, again, you can do fairly well financially as well as having a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, you definitely can. So you and I, a couple weeks out of the AMP 2023 conference in Denver. The next thing I want to talk about when it comes to important aspects of leadership and opportunities for me is the membership that I have with AMP, that it does allow me to stay as part of a community through for example, we have here in Pittsburgh, the Steel City chapter, big chapter, growingly more active as a chapter, but also too, it gives me a great network to be able to work with others in the association, both to collaborate with them. Some are my customers, some are my prospects, some are my subject matter experts I can go and ask questions for. But membership with association, but also participation with the association has greatly benefited me. So as a emerging leader, or if you're a seasoned leader, get active with the community. If it's in corrosion, if it's in coatings, maybe it's in both you'll be actively involved in. But think of it also too in a global stage, because these days you could be working with anybody. There are people watching this stream right now on the other side of the country. I'm sorry, the other side of the world. And so it's a beautiful thing to be able to be part of a community but be very active with the community. When it comes to your association with, obviously SSPC, NACE, and then the merger into AMP, how beneficial for you has it been?
One of the things I learned about my personality type is I really enjoy travel. I have no problem with traveling whatsoever. And because AMP is such a global organization, I can reach out to the network and say, hey, I'm going to be in Malaysia. Do you need a guest speaker at the chapter about whatever topic you want to talk about? And invariably, I can get on those opportunities. And then when I go speak to these, it includes owners and engineers and contractors and coating suppliers. They learn who I am. They learn how I can help. They learn how my organization can help. And so really, it's provided that opportunity across the board. I think I spoke at this past year, something like 9 different chapters. And they were throughout Texas, Louisiana, but then it was like China, right? It was India. It was, all of these really cool places where the opportunity to speak about what we do and how we solve problems in the industry. So it's really helped me spin out my network to be as global as possible. I probably know more people overseas in the industry than outside America than I do probably inside, because I've spent so much time. But that for me has been just a blessing, because I really can go just about anywhere and reach out to someone in the network and go have a coffee and say hello and catch up about what's going on in that country or that area. So AMP has provided me so many of those opportunities. And, if you raise your hand, then a lot of times they're going to say yes. So, be careful what you wish for. But the thing is you can really be as involved as you want to be in shaping the industry that you're in. And there's not a lot of industries that are like that you can just be so involved to change, what the new product development may look like, or the specifications, or again, how we solve certain problems. You really can help shape what's going to happen next.
Yeah. And to kind of talk about, to shape what's happening next, as we're kind of winding down this live stream, let's talk about some key industry certifications that those that are in the corrosion and coatings industry should kind of look at and obtain and get certified in. Let's focus first on the global protective coatings industry. And the first topic the first course, or let's say certification I want to talk about, you mentioned earlier, which is the AMP CIP, the Coatings Inspector Program. What's the value of CIP, and why should people pursue it either as a level 1, or if they're an active inspector, go on to level 2 and level 3?
I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that that course changed the trajectory of my career. No question about it. Probably the most valuable thing I ever did to change the direction of where I was going in my career, which really worked to my advantage in my personality type. Coatings, there's 3 parts to the coat that make a coating system work, right? You have to have the right product applied under the right conditions, right product under the right conditions over the right surface preparation. And if you work for a coating manufacturer, you just make the right product. But those other 2 legs of the stool are, you have to understand those fully, because many times that's where the problems lie. And so you have to understand that those are part of what makes the coating perform. And if you don't understand the simple QA/QC steps, you're going to be very challenged in thinking, well, I can just put it on and it'll work, and I can apply it at any temperature and any relative humidity over any surface prep. Just a funny story. I had an engineer. Before I came to Hempel, I was a partner in a large engineering firm in the U.S. And one of my engineers came to the office and I said, well, look, the data sheet says I can apply the product over any level of these surface preparations. And I said, well, what are you doing? He says, I'm building a new tank. And I said, well, he says, it's near an airport, so we'd like to grind the tank. And I said, well, what's your warranty going to be on this tank? And he says, well, we only have to make it last 1 year. And I said, well, cool. You'll probably have to enforce that warranty if you're going to try to grind brand new steel with a power tool. I said, it'll probably fail before you get off the job site. And he says, well, the data sheet says I can pick any one, right? And I said, oh no. Understanding how that, this one will make it last 20 years and this will make it last 3. You have to understand that those are very important. So the CIP course, I think for anybody entering this industry, is a must-have more than anything else.
And then the next certification, which I obtained myself, and actually by obtaining it, well, level 1, let's say that, I'm not certified either in protective coatings, and also in concrete coatings. But the second one that I went, because it's innovative in the industry. I don't believe there's any global organization that offers a concrete coatings inspector. There's a level 1 and a level 2 that's available, and that's only through AMP. Can you talk a little bit about concrete coatings inspector?
Yeah, so I've been teaching this course, I can't remember how long now, but I teach the CIP and I teach the CCI course. And, I think the CCI course, we actually coat, in the industry, we coat more concrete than we do steel, right? And concrete has its own challenges in that the substrate, if not properly installed, can have problems. Steel's a lot more homogeneous. It's a little easier to work with. But with concrete, there's all sorts of things that can cause the coating not to adhere. And so it really is an important piece in understanding those other factors that you don't run into with steel substrates that are very critical in making the coating perform. Just doing simple adhesion tests, right? On a steel substrate, you may get several thousand PSI. If you get 400 or 500 PSI on concrete, you'd be ecstatic, because the tensile strength of concrete is only that high. It's usually about 10% of the compressive strength. So you have to understand that there's differences there. If you didn't understand that, if the data sheet says you can get a 2000 PSI pull, and then you go out and do a test on concrete and you get a 400 PSI pull and say, well, it fails, we're going to reject the coating, you would run into a lot of problems. So it's an extremely valuable course. It's one of the more challenging ones, that I would say, and I don't know what the pass rate is, but it takes a lot of focus time for the concrete course for sure. So I think that one's really, really critical as well, if you're going to take that very next step behind the CIP.
And the next one, which you and I have in common, and for me, it's the only one I can take because I'm not an active coatings inspector, but I do work around specifications. I work around, a lot of times the project planning and everything that goes associated with protective coatings and linings, is the AMP Protective Coatings Specialist certification. What's the importance, and who should focus on a PCS certification?
So I look at this one. So I got actually the legacy SSPC one, and I took the NACE one as well. And so, and I'm also involved. I was involved in the rewrite of the test and actually writing the job task analysis for this certification. And this one is really designed, the original thought process behind this, as I mentioned before, I'm an engineer, I'm building bridges, right? But I don't know anything about coatings, and I have a coating specification to coat the bridge, and the problem is, how do I write a good specification for coating the bridge when I've had no training in that area, right? I understand you have a PE and you're a smart person, but the degree programs that you get for civil, mechanical, electrical, petroleum engineering don't talk about coatings. And so this kind of fills that gap in giving you the ability to do that well, so you can specify getting a quality product, specifying the products properly, understanding the contract process. So I think that one's really geared for that engineer in these consulting companies that needs that extra bit of knowledge so they don't run into problems. Because the problem is not typically the design of the structure, right? The problems you run into is when we have to do maintenance, or when we're building the bridge and it says, well, geez, we coated the steel in China and that was 6 months ago. Now what do we do with the primer that had showed up in the steels on the job site? And if you don't understand some simple basics about protective coatings, you might say, well, just pressure wash it and go ahead and put the paint on the next coat. And when it peels off in large chunks, everybody gets embarrassed. So this is, I think the protective coating specialist really fills that gap really well for the staff engineer that's working on these types of projects. And really, there's not any project where you don't have protective coatings, pipelines, and even when you're dealing with building buildings, right? You have mechanical systems. Again, you're coating potentially concrete. All of these are things that you're going to need to be able to specify clearly so that you don't run into problems. So it's a great one to have.
Yeah, so true on that. For those watching, and David, when I talk about the corrosion industry and protective coatings industry, I kind of separate them, but they really kind of work in hand to hand. They work in conjunction. There's a little bit of a symbiotic relationship with them. And you'll probably agree with me that a lot of times some strategies will require a combination of cathodic protection and coating systems to be able to effectively deal with whatever an owner wants to accomplish, let's say when it comes to protection of an asset. What's important about it is that both sides of let's say the corrosion equation, both sides of that coin, they do understand and know how to work together with each other. So a couple of the corrosion protection or cathodic protection courses that I want to just kind of throw out there would be when you're looking at, for example, in cathodic protection, a CP2 or a CP3, and having that, not only the people that are going to be the technicians, but also have those people who are going to be certified to be able to, make the call on what type of system needs to go in there, maybe having a better understanding and call on what type of corrosion's happening. That's going to be very critical. So I always encourage people to look at those CP courses as well. And then another one too that was started under NACE, especially after the last global corrosion study was done, was the NACE came out with what they call Impact Plus. Now, Impact Plus, it is something that, for the most part, I think as an owner, you probably could have people take this. But for people who want to get in consulting and want to be focused on corrosion, you can get certified in this particular program. And it's basically a strategy for corrosion management. And then it also has part of it dealing with pipeline corrosion management as well. So it's able to be that, let's call it asset integrity person, but also it's super critical. As you and I have talked to a lot of owners and a lot of others out there, to have that coding program so that you can, maintain your assets and hit them in a timely fashion, be able to budget. The same thing goes with corrosion as well. Anything additional related to CP that you would want to add that maybe I didn't mention about?
No, so in my career, I'm a CP2 also.
Okay.
And the thing is I was dealing with midstream companies, right? So everything that came out of the ground, we dealt with on coatings, and cathodic protection really works for buried assets or assets that are underwater. And so the coatings isn't the only solution you have. Understanding you could also substitute materials, right? Maybe I instead of using a protective coating, I'd make the structure out of stainless. or galvanizing, right? Galvanizing is a protective coating, but not a liquid product. So these are really important in dealing with, you talk about corrosion and degradation of materials. I was dealing in pipeline. Well, what happens when we have pitting and section loss of the pipeline, right? So as a necessary requirement for me to be the best engineer I could be with my customers, I went and got my API 570, which is piping inspector certification. And then, of course, my customers had insulated piping, right? So I said, well, geez, they don't teach about insulation in college as well. So what I did was I went to the National Insulation Association, which has a thermal insulation inspector program. I know AMP has now got one as well. And, again, these are all situations that are microenvironments that you need to understand to be able to properly steer your customer to the most, again, cost-effective solution. The Impact Plus is great. One thing that I've learned over all these years is nothing happens without a budget. Nothing happens without a budget. And so Impact Plus gives you the opportunity to kind of create that framework of assets in your batting order that you can use to maintain that. So I think that's one of the things that AMP has come up with that can be used a lot more, because if you have a lot of assets and you only have a certain budget, you're able to maintain those. Coming up with what am I going to do this year, what am I going to do next year and the following year is very important in managing your overall strategy.
Perfect. David, I know you and I could talk about, and hopefully in the future we'll keep talking about, do more content on protective coatings, corrosion topics. You and I could talk probably for days on things. I really greatly appreciate having you on this series, and also to your insight, also to your dedication to both the corrosion and protective coatings industry, and really kind of help cultivate, train, and develop the younger generation, but also to inspire anyone at any career level to get into training, the certification, take these learnings, and then ultimately let's go down that path to become an industry leader and really add value to not only yourself, but add value to the industry, give back to the industry. David, how can people follow you, get in contact with you, all that kind of good stuff?
Well, I'm all over LinkedIn. I kind of let people know what I'm out there and doing. My contact information is on there. I certainly can share my contact information through this portal. But I'm very accessible and certainly willing to help wherever that may be. Hempel is very supportive of me. One of the things about corrosion is you kind of have to go where it is, right? So if you like to travel, this is the industry for you. And so the organization's really supported me in going to different locations to help solve these customer problems, because the corrosion strategy that you may handle in Iowa may not be the same corrosion strategy that you have in Thailand, because they're totally different environments. And so that's been really fun to learn and execute on. So my email is hunt@hempel.com, and my mobile is 832-863-6039. You can reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to help. And if I'm not the right person to solve your problem, or I'm just geographically undesirable, I can help get other people involved, and that's fairly easy to do.
Well, I can attest that you've been a great help for me since I met you back in 2013. I greatly appreciate you as an industry colleague. Great success to you, and keep doing what you're doing, because you are making a huge impact out there, not only as an educator, but also too as an industry leader. David, thank you so much for being on with me this evening.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Have a great one.
All right, everybody. Check in next week for another installment of the Leadership Series. And also, too, if you could do me a favor, like this stream, but also, too, share it with other colleagues. Again, it doesn't matter if you're in the global corrosion or protective coatings industry. Any industry can really benefit from what David just talked about. And also, too, make sure that you are looking at yourself to be an industry leader, but also helping others realize their potential as being an industry leader as well. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Subscribe to Coatings Talk on YouTube. See you next time.